Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Voices of the Game from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And it's just about time for our weekly Friday chat. During the past few weeks and months, we have been looking at people within baseball, but also people outside of baseball, people that are big baseball fans and have a connection to the game. We're very glad to have with us today someone who is very well known to fans of Turner Classic, someone who is a noted film historian. I want to give you some of his background. He has been a television reporter and anchor, a one-time host of At the Movies. Since 2003, has been a host at Turner Classic. He became the second higher among hosts after Robert Osborne, and he is now the principal host for Turner Classic. And perhaps more importantly than anything else, he is nearly a lifetime fan of the Oakland Athletics since 1977. Very happy to have with us Ben Mankiewicz. Ben, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. How have you been holding up since this whole pandemic began?
Well, it's been very good to have been working for TCM. We got a studio set up here at home, so one would think that I would know how to set up the lights. But as a fact, as you can tell from half my face being dark, I haven't quite mastered that yet, at least in the amount of time I gave myself for this. So the working has certainly helped. And I certainly don't want to overstate, because we're sort of daily, seeing really, I think, heroic behavior across the country. I mean, from obviously doctors and nurses and scientists and researchers, but delivery drivers, everybody working in grocery stores, people who are risking their lives to make sure that we can have some semblance of the order that we have had, for the previous however long we've been alive. And so that said, it's been really nice to be part of something that really matters to people. And we have a lot of people at home. We have a lot of people at home alone. And we know these movies have been providing great comfort. So that, makes everybody associated with TCM feel good. And that has certainly helped me personally, get through the last couple of months.
How have your duties changed since the pandemic began? Have they changed much at all?
I mean, I have 3 lavalier microphones and 1 big studio mic and a ring light and 3 now studio lights and an iPad, which I shoot at home that has a teleprompter on it, and I've turned my upstairs office, which thankfully is pretty sizable, into sort of a studio. I got Studio A and Studio B. This is the auxiliary Studio B, so I can at least sit down. It's crazy. And I'm, when I say I'm putting on my own makeup, I don't mean anybody should think, oh, woe is me, has to put on his own makeup, but I'm not very good at it. The makeup artists, they're artists. And it has led me to recognize something that I already knew. And I'm dressing myself and I don't know how to put the pocket square in, and I'm never quite sure what to wear. And our wardrobe stylist, she knows what she's doing, and to say nothing of the producers and directors. And so you just recognize, when we talk about a movie and we talk about the actors and maybe the director and hopefully the writer, the set designer, the costume designer, the production manager, the lighting director, all these people come together to make these pieces of art that we love and make us feel something. And it is really a collaborative process. And so here at home, I'm on the phone with a couple of producers, but you feel alone and you recognize how valuable it is, people coming together to make something that other people are supposed to enjoy. So I already appreciated it, but I'm now learning firsthand sort of, the difference between doing something on your own and doing something collaborative. And I would much rather collaborate. That is what I've learned.
Let's talk a little bit about your family. Your grandfather, Herman J. Mankiewicz, we see a photograph of him here. He was a huge part of Hollywood, a screenwriter for Citizen Kane, Pride of the Yankees, among many films, won an Oscar. You never met him, though. He died in 1953. You were not born until the late 1960s. You're a couple of years younger than me, I'm happy to tell you. So you never met him, but was knowledge of him, was that the reason you became interested in studying film, or did that interest come from other sources?
I mean, it came from other sources, but I would be foolish not to recognize the role that he and his brother, my Uncle Joe, my great uncle, played in that. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my father was the star of the family, figuratively and literally. He was a important political figure in Washington for most of my life. He had been Bobby Kennedy's press secretary, and then George McGovern's political director, ran the campaign with Gary Hart. Ran for Congress, and then was sort of a consultant to a lot of people, including the Senator Edward Kennedy. And he was the smartest person anybody knew. Certainly I knew, but even the other smart people he hung out with, it was just clear that what my father had to say was always important. He was also a great dad. He's also unquestionably the person who got me interested in baseball, made me a baseball fan. He was a Cardinal fan. And so I was aware of the Hollywood roots of the family. He certainly was proud of his father's contributions, but it seemed secondary. It didn't seem important to me, certainly not as important as the political part. So I then came at the movie part really late in life. I did not grow up a classic movie fan. I just didn't. That began to happen in my 20s, really. In college, I had a couple moments seeing North by Northwest, which my mother made me watch, and I liked, but nothing happened really until college, and then throughout my 20s when I started to pay more attention, and then came to recognize that maybe the Hollywood wing of the family, which is where my father grew up in Beverly Hills, was a little more, mattered a little more to the industry anyway than I had recognized.
You mentioned growing up in Washington, and by the time you really became of age as a baseball fan, the Senators had left. They were gone as of 1971. So you're in the mid 70s. You've got no baseball team in the area, but you gravitate to a team on the other coast. And I understand it was because of this man, Reggie Jackson, that you really first became interested in the Oakland A's.
That's right. So my dad took me to my first game in 1976 at Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. It was an Indians-Orioles game. Wayne Garland pitched, and Frank Robinson was the player manager of the Indians. And I don't know whether he started, but he at least pinch hit. He had an at bat. And 1976 was Reggie's lone year with Baltimore. But that same year, I took an interest in the A's, and I suspect that was because he got traded to the Orioles late in spring training, straight up for Don Baylor, and I don't know, those kind of trades don't happen. Such a great trade. I first of all loved the uniforms, loved the white shoes, but Reggie I just heard of. He just mattered. He had penetrated. But the real story comes the year before in 1975, and not until the World Series. I don't remember paying one bit of attention to baseball before October of 1975. And my cousins, the sons of my dad's sister, Josie, who my daughter is named for, they came to D.C. Josie had been killed the summer before in a terrible, she was walking on the street and she got hit by a cab in Greenwich Village. So they came to spend time with my father during the World Series, and us. I was very close to them, Tim and Nick Davis. And they were big baseball fans, Mets fans, and they were watching the World Series with my father, and obviously it's this great series, and they're into it. And I see them bonding with my dad over baseball. And that feeling of being left out, even though I'm sure my father tried to include me, of missing something with my dad was profound. You could feel it in my fingers. And I think that I just decided, no way does this happen again. No chance. And I was already a huge Washington Bullets fan, a huge football fan of the Skins. And so I just determined that I was going to make myself a fan. And during 76, I don't know, I just thought I got baseball cards. Reggie was still with the A's on the cards. And then I just followed them a little. you know, and I remember for whatever reason, I guess because he led off, I remember Bill North. Like yeah. And then I saw Reggie with the Orioles, but it didn't click to like the Orioles. It just didn't click. I guess I'd made up my mind about the A's, but I could have been influenced. And then the spring of '77, Mitchell Page shows up in Oakland in the early part of the season, and he just tears it up the first week. And my father tells me, right, oh, those were such great cards, right? And I love the Manny Sengi and the obviously painted Oakland jersey there. It's so good. So in '77, you know, and my father tells me about Page, and he'd hit home runs and he'd stolen bases, and I just clicked. I was like, oh, I love that guy. I love his name. And I love that he's fast and powerful. And that was it. And then my obsession, I was a fan in '76, and I remember being disappointed when they didn't make the playoffs. Didn't win the division. And then '77, that was it. It's stuck. And there's no team in DC. And it never really occurred to me to be an Oriole fan. It's a different city. You know, it's like you might as well have been a Braves fan. Like it's a different place. It never occurred to me that made sense to root for the Orioles.
You know, you mentioned Reggie and he leaves, but you still are passionate about the A's. They weren't particularly good in 1977. They go 63 and 98, but they still have some really interesting characters. Manny Sanguian, who was traded for Chuck Tanner. I love the airbrushing as well here. Not only did they get the helmet, but they got the cap under the helmet as well.
Oh, I don't even think I noticed that. That's great. I didn't even, I have
Vita
that
Blue
card,
on the right was a terrific pitcher, really became the ace after Catfish Hunter left. But then another guy that you really liked was the aforementioned Billy North.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, I probably never saw a game. I'm certain I never saw an A's game. I think North was in there in '77 in addition to '76, we're looking at the '77 cards. So those photos, you know, are from the spring of probably earlier, you know, and certainly the game action is from '76. So I don't know if there was a game on, you know, whatever, the Saturday game of the week or on Monday Night Baseball that I saw with the A's. I don't recall, but I liked him, and obviously had the cards. So I liked his look. I liked the beard. And I guess if Page hadn't come along, I'd be talking these last hunk of years about Bill North, but he hardly, you know, he left the A's soon after, I think, to the Cubs. I might have that backwards. And, so, you know, I would have picked one of those other guys on the A's. I would have picked, you know, Rodney Scott. Somebody like that, but there's Page. I don't know. I wore glasses. Maybe that mattered. But that definitely, Page just resonated, and it was the power and the speed. And I don't want to pretend like I was some speed demon, but among all the kids, I was the fastest of my group of friends. My friend Jim Altman, who's a reporter in Hartford, Connecticut, would instantly get out of his chair and argue that he was the fastest. So I don't know. I loved speed, and I don't know. He just resonated, and I'm sure that name made a difference. You know that. But then he was on the cover of the Sporting News in June. I have that framed downstairs. It's not even in my office. It's in the living room. I mean, we make everybody who, you know, comes over. Back in the old days, people used to come over, and they got to see that frame poster of Mitchell Page on the cover of the Sporting News.
He finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting in 1978 to a pretty good player, Eddie Murray. Some people, though, thought Page had the better season. They thought that Page maybe deserved the award. Murray, of course, ended up being the better player. Sadly, Page passed away back in 2011. He actually died in his sleep, I believe, from a heart attack. But an interesting connection to film, because many years after he is a star for the A's, he appears in Angels in the Outfield. And I know that you enjoyed seeing that performance.
Yeah, I don't even recall it when it came out. Maybe I didn't see it when it came out, but certainly, you know, once whenever I discovered it, that he was in it, I don't know. You know, he has one great line where he says, "Fundamentals in the middle of the season," after Danny Glover says everybody's going to come in tomorrow. We're going to take infield practice. So yeah, I mean, that was great. And I think Carney Lansford was in that movie too. And, you know, let me just go back to 1977 and the Rookie of the Year voting. There's not some people who think Page should have won. It's not close. He had one of the great rookie years of the decade, probably one of the great rookie years until balls started flying out of the park. You know, I mean, he hit 307. He walked 80 times. He didn't strike out that much. He stole 25 straight bases, which was a record at the time, an American League record. He stole 42 bases. I think he was caught 5 times, 21 home runs, 75 runs batted, and a lot of doubles. he had OPS over 900. We didn't know what OPS was then, but I knew he'd had a great year. And Murray had a fine year, but again, is not close. But Murray played in Baltimore, and that team won 100 games, and they were in a pennant race with the Yankees the entire season. And the A's game started at 10:30. They were terrible. I mean, in the Washington Post, and I'm sure obviously the New York Times, and in the places where writers were that mattered, every Oakland game was late, and you had to buy an afternoon paper to see the box score. And they were getting, in 78, the next year was the year I think they drew 600 and some odd fans to a weekday game against the White Sox, 600 people to see them. So, they were bad and irrelevant, and nobody saw their games, and they were on late. So, and he still finished second, but he should have been a unanimous choice. It really wasn't close.
Yeah.
One time I met him, I mentioned that, and he goes, yeah, maybe. He goes, but the other guy's in the going to the Hall of Fame. I don't think he was in yet, but he was like, maybe he was. He was like, I think he was. So the other guy's in the Hall of Fame, so I guess they got it right. So he was cool about it.
In spite of all those problems and being on the West Coast not being very good, you remain passionate and still a fan of the A's to this day. Let's talk about some films, and let's talk about a film that has a direct connection to your grandfather, Herman. He was one of the screenwriters for The Pride of the Yankees. It's a terrific movie. It's I think one of the greatest baseball films ever made. But when you watch it, maybe talk about it, is it hard to be objective knowing the family connection, knowing that your grandfather was involved? Or are you able to look at it objectively and say, hey, yeah, it's a great film?
I think I'm able to look at it objectively, but everybody who thinks they're able to look at something objectively probably isn't. That said, because I didn't know him, I suspect I can. I mean, my favorite thing about the movie, well, a couple of things. One, that sort of story that all the shots were reversed to make Cooper left-handed. They're not really true. They're like a couple, right? Which, of course, the Hall researched and figured out. So, but the best thing about that movie is Cooper playing Gehrig in college at Columbia, because I mean, there's really no effort to make him look like he looks, Cooper always looked older than he was, or around this time started at least to look older than he was. He was always a serious person, and he had those great lines in his face. The idea that guy's 19, it's just, they don't even try. It's great. And then, of course, Herman, he has two lines that he wrote in the AFI's list of the top 100 lines in movie history. And one of them is, today I consider myself the luckiest man on the earth, but he didn't write that. Gehrig said it, right? But it's in the movie, so somehow it's in that, it's in the list. And then the other one is Rosebud. Again, I don't know, it's not really a line. It's a word. But yeah, I think the movie's great, obviously. And when you have, Babe Ruth in it playing himself, and he's pretty good. You see what a showman Ruth is. If Ruth had wanted to be an actor, I think he probably would have been a pretty good one.
You mentioned the research done by the Hall to show that there was not a lot of reverse negative, that Cooper basically did learn to hit left-handed. We have to mention that was done by Hall of Fame curator Tom Schieber, who may be listening and watching as we speak. And I remember you mentioning and talking about Tom in introducing this film once. So it's kind of nice to have that connection there.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect every time I introduce the film now, I'm going to work that in some way, because it was my dad used to believe that. He said everything was shot the other way, and neither of us knew enough to sort of look at it frame by frame. I don't even think we had it. We just, if you caught it, it was because it was on television. Yeah, so that's just a great old story, and it turned out not to be true, and as so many of them are. There's another great story my dad used to tell me about this movie that I suspect is not true, but can never be checked. Sam Goldwyn produced it and was, as an immigrant, some take to, the national pastime, some don't. And Goldwyn was one of those who didn't and couldn't quite figure out why Americans love baseball so much. And the baseball scenes in the movie, he thought really slowed the pace. And so Herman said that he asked, Herman and Sam Wood, the director, can we speed this up in some way? How about the 3 balls and 2 strikes? Do we need to draw this out as much as we're doing? There's no way that's true, but I do love that story.
Or they could have started the runner on second base.
Right, sure, right. Something crazy like that would never happen, right?
Yeah. Ben, let's talk about some of your favorite baseball movies. The 1980s is really kind of a glory time. You had films like The Natural, Bull Durham, Field of Dreams. Would your favorite baseball film, if you have one, would it fall from that category in the 1980s, or would it be another movie?
I mean, there's so many that I love, and that sort of were important to me. And I mean, Major League was important to me. Again, it's two questions: which ones resonate the most with me, and then what do I think are the best? Um, I think the best that I instantly always think of is Sugar. Um,
Hmm.
which I thought was great, but it's not the movie that mattered to me most. And the movie that mattered to me most, no question, is Field of Dreams. And I mean, I had this intense, wonderful relationship with my father, and baseball. I mean, it grew from that, but it really, the intensity of the closeness came from baseball, and that shared love, and that we could always talk about that, and UCLA basketball, but baseball first and foremost. And so I saw that movie I saw it with my girlfriend at the time, Julie Alvarado. She lived in the Bay Area. She lived across the bridge in Marin County. When I went to visit her, we were together in college, and that was the first time I recognized. I was in a place with other Ace fans. First time I went to the Coliseum, I was like, "My God, who are these people?" And that was 1988. Such a wonderful year for the Ace. Didn't end so wonderful, but and so I see that movie, and I see it at night, and I can't call my father because it's 3 hours later on the East Coast. But I talk to him the next morning. Whenever I woke up, I call and I say, Dad, listen, I saw Field of Dreams last night, and and before I can say anything, and I'm crying at the catch at the end, and between Kevin Costner and his dad, and I and as soon as I say I saw it last night, my dad jumps in. He goes, "Oh my God, we saw it earlier in the week." Oh, what drivel! If you build it, they will. What does that mean? What is the nonsense? Oh my God, I couldn't wait for it to end. Whatever he says, right? And I'm crushed instantly, and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I liked it, I guess, a little better than you, but right." And we go on, talk about something else, and hang up. And I love telling that story, right? And then, when I finally tell it to him or around him, I don't know, 8 years later, he denies everything. He goes, "I loved that movie. It made me think of us and together." And it was just such, I mean, God bless him for pretending. One of the other things I love about, first, that he was so honest, and secondly, that later he thought, "Oh, if I hurt my son's feelings, I gotta change the whole story. Let's just change the narrative. Let's tell
Hmm.
a different story and make that true."
It's interesting, though, Ben. Field of Dreams in recent years has drawn what I guess I would call revisionist criticism. Some people say, oh, it's too sappy. Some people have criticized it because it ignores the Negro Leagues. Some people have criticized Costner for his acting. I don't think any of these are particularly legitimate criticisms, but perhaps you've heard them as well. What would your counter argument be?
I mean, that they're true to the people who think them. I mean, certainly the ignorance of the Negro Leagues is true. And so I like that conversation, because we ought not be. In fact, we're committing a sin when we are. Holding that movie in particular responsible for it is seems unfair, but the discussion is 100% worthwhile. I think Costner's great in it, so I think that's nonsense. And I don't care about Sappy. Sappy is all right if
Yeah.
Sappy is done well. When, again, as I talked about in the beginning, when artists come together and orchestrate Sappy effectively. And I watched on a Memorial Day, as I try to do every year. I watched Saving Private Ryan. I've done it many years. My wife and I watched Saving Private Ryan, and there's criticism of that movie, which is the greatest Oscar rob in the history of the world. That Shakespeare in Love beat it for Best Picture. It's one of the great movies of the late 20th century, I think. And the framing device of having Private Ryan as an old man at the beginning of the movie, and the end going to the grave, those bookends are criticized as being sort of manipulative, and there's Spielberg being Spielberg. And I think, yeah, there's Spielberg being Spielberg. That's great. You do it well, that's terrific. If Frank Darabont doesn't orchestrate, and he was told to do this, he didn't want to do it, but he recognized it was great. If he doesn't shoot the beach scene at the end, between Andy and Red in Shawshank Redemption, if it's done poorly, it is a goofy ending. It's definitely sappy, I mean, it gives you exactly what you want. Them together, we talk about they were prisoners and then they embrace on a beach in Mexico at the end of the movie. It's ridiculous, except it's fantastic. It's perfect. So if you know, if you don't like sappy, then you probably can't spend a lot of time at the movie theaters.
Good point. One other thing on Field of Dreams, back in 2004, James Earl Jones came to the Hall of Fame. He did a program, such a nice gentleman. He was so welcoming to the Hall of Fame staff. We, of course, welcomed him, gracious, just a lovely person. Have you ever had a chance to meet James Earl Jones?
No, I would love to. And you know, I grew up on This Is CNN. That, you know, that to me means more than I Am Your Father. So yeah, I have enormous respect for James Earl Jones as an actor. One of the movies that spending this 17 years at TCM has afforded me a great opportunity to get to know is this movie he made that got Diane Carroll an Oscar nomination, Claudine, which I hadn't seen, which I didn't really know about. And Ava DuVernay, who was our host last season on The Essentials, it's Brad Bird this season. She brought Claudine to our attention. We made it an essential film with her. It's one of my favorite movies from the era that I love most, which is 1967 and 1976 in American movies. And Claudine is one of the great movies there. And she and James Earl Jones is this couple finding their way together, this, you know, real working class, you know, not middle class at all, working class people sort of, you know, living within the system in New York and finding their way as a blended family. It's just a great movie. So, you know, James Earl Jones, top-notch, top-tier actor, you know, then became known for these sort of big blockbusters. But this was a, you know, a layered, textured actor. And I would love to meet him and discuss his career. We've tried at CNN. It's hard to get some of these people to come in because they're busy.
Yeah. I believe he lives in upstate New York. At least he did when he came in 2004. Not really a Hollywood resident, so that could be a.
That's part. Yeah, that's part of it. I've certainly never seen him around.
Yeah. Made two other significant baseball films: The Sandlot in the early 1990s, and then going back to the mid 70s, Bingo Long and the Traveling All Stars. Criticized movie, but he's surprisingly athletic, and he's very good in the film about the Negro Leagues back at that time. Let's talk about some other movies, Ben. The Natural. I'll give you my take, and then you give us
sure. Yeah, please, Bruce.
Far more intelligent take. When I first saw this in 1984, I thought it was ridiculous. It didn't make any sense. It was a fantasy. You know, he hits the light tower, and it's like a fireworks show. I watch it now. I love it. I'm older now. I guess I'm more sentimental. I think it's a great movie. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm almost with you exactly. I don't remember it resonating at all in 1984 when it came out. And I do remember the lights being silly. I still think the lights are silly, to be honest. That's my lone criticism of it, is that it sort of takes it like it's a fantasy, but you're buying it within the context that they establish, which is the key to any fantasy, is staying true to the construct that you set up in the first place. But now it sort of, you know, swells my heart. And I love just about every frame until the scoreboard lights go out. You know, Wilford Brimley's so good. Everybody's good, and particularly Redford, who I have come to think is one of the great actors of his generation. I don't think he has to take a back seat to anyone in his era, including Newman. I think he's outstanding, and I think he's great in this. And you can see his athleticism too. We took the TCM to Buffalo. We pick a city to help support our festival, which is normally in the spring in Los Angeles. And we went to Buffalo because with Barry Levinson, the director, to screen The Natural, because almost the entire movie was shot there. Buffalo stands in for Chicago and New York in the film, and the farm fields in between. And they went there for the stadium. The old Memorial Stadium in Buffalo was still a classic 1930s field. And so, and that town loves the movie. They just respond to it. They sort of embrace it and consider it their own. So that was a really nice experience. But yeah, now I've grown to adore that movie.
Also, two of my favorite character actors, Darren McGavin and Robert Duvall, both play great roles.
Yeah, I always debate. I mean, Robert Duvall, again, he is a character actor, but it feels like we're underselling him, we're calling him a character actor because he's, of course, I mean, he's got a Best Actor Oscar. Um, uh, yeah, but ultimately he is a character actor. He's arguably the best character actor. I remember hearing him on Howard Stern talking about method acting. Um, and it's a little, and because he'd been in something with Daniel Day-Lewis, and he praised Lewis, but he was like, yeah, I don't quite get it. Like, you say action, and then you deliver your lines in that character, and then it's over, and then you go home, and you're Robert Duvall. Like, I don't see what the big deal is. And that great Laurence Olivier, Dustin Hoffman story from Marathon Man, where, for the signature scene of the film, and Hoffman's got to be exhausted and up and sort of panicked and sweaty, so he ran. I don't know, he jogged and ran in place, and he stayed up all night. He was up like 30 hours before they shot the scene because he wanted to be in character, and he wanted to be paranoid and exhausted and fearful. And Olivier said to him something like, yes. Why don't you just try acting? Such a great sort of clash of cultures.
Yeah. People ask me all the time, since I work at the Hall of Fame, they want to know, what's your favorite baseball movie? And ever since it came out, 1992, my answer has been A League of Their Own. I love it. Great comedy, great drama, nice balance between the two. Your thoughts on this Tom Hanks movie?
Love it. I love Tom Hanks. We just saw that Thing You Do last night, which I hadn't seen, and since it came out with my 7-year-old daughter, and she loved it. My wife hadn't seen it. She loved it. We showed her League of Their Own a couple of months ago, and she loved that. And she loved it because it's great. I'm totally with you. You can't make a top 10 list, maybe even a top 5 list of baseball movies without including A League of Their Own. Hanks, he's one of those actors who, if he's in the movie, even the movies of his that you may not love, and there aren't very many, they're okay merely because Tom Hanks has an important role. He makes things better. And, of all the big stars I've met, everybody says this, he's just so full of kindness and decency and interested in you, not really wanting to talk about himself. And, I think everybody would say this, and he happens to be a huge classic movie fan. So is Rita Wilson. Same. They're just so great. A League of Their Own is great. And, and it really does teach you. I mean, most people didn't know about the league. And though this story is fictional, it's essentially true. It gives you a really good representation of what that league was. Even if the story itself is fictional, it doesn't matter.
So much focus on the great line about there's no crying in baseball. That's probably the most repeated line from the movie. For me, though, the more important line was when he and Gina Davis are on the bus, and Gina Davis doesn't know if she can go through with it. She's thinking about quitting. She talks about how hard baseball is. And then Hanks comes forward, and I'm paraphrasing here, and he said, well, that's what makes baseball great. The hard is what makes the game great. If it was easy, everybody could play it. To me, that's the line that sticks from that film.
Yeah, it represents so much of what baseball is about. I mean, obviously, you could tell me, and somebody who doesn't like baseball would counter that football and basketball are all about failure too. And that's true, obviously. I mean, one team loses, and if you get beat on a deep ball as a defensive back, you've been beaten, literally. You've failed. But baseball is about failure in each moment. I mean, each pitch. When I really sort of began to feel like baseball was, that I had made a wrong decision not to go into it as a broadcaster or to try to be a front office executive, that it's in the fiber of your being, is when I didn't want to miss a pitch. Like, it matters. I mean, I got it if it's 11-2 in the 5th inning, and I always use the Rangers and the Mariners as a game that America doesn't want to see on a Wednesday, even though, those are division rivals of the A's, and I actually care very much about that game. But, every pitch matters. Every pitch is a decision. Every pitch is a choice. And you just don't think about basketball and football, and which I love both, but you don't think about it that way. And so every pitch is a failure if you don't execute it. or if if it's a 2-0 pitch and you're expecting something else, but somehow you get that fastball and it's elevated a little in the zone and you don't swing. Or you miss, right? I mean, that's a failure. Like, that's your pitch to hit and you failed, or you, for some reason, don't pull the trigger. There's these individual failures that are so individual, the hitter or the pitcher, every 20 seconds, or the way things have been going lately, every 35 seconds, you get that moment.
Let's go rapid fire through some other really worthy baseball films. I know this is one that you like. A lot of people like it for good reason. Moneyball from 2011. I had never thought Brad Pitt was a great actor, but this one kind of brought out his true ability, I thought. He really carried this film.
Yeah, I mean, rapid fire, I think Brad Pitt's excellent, and I think he's an excellent actor, maybe even a terrific actor, and certainly getting better and more interesting with age. So good in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I regretted in this movie because I'm an A's fan, which is not fair, that, again, that they're the same criticism that others have, like, what about, Tejada and Chavez, and what about the big three? But I get it. That wasn't what it's about. I love it now. I love the book. I love that there was sort of an appreciation of the way the A's do things, which by then they've been doing for 12 years. And I love being an A's fan. I love it when they're bad. I love it when they trade Josh Donaldson. I didn't like the trade, but I love that they thought it was the right thing to do. I love their boldness.
Here we're not showing a poster, but this actually is an artifact, Ben, from the Hall of Fame collection. It's the jersey, the Dodger jersey, that Chadwick Boseman wore in portraying Jackie Robinson in 2013's very fine movie, 42. How'd you like this one?
I liked it a lot. Chadwick Boseman obviously has established himself as a first-rate performer with, again, the ability to do nuance effectively. This movie was terrific, and again, whatever flaws you might have in it, it gave people, I think, a very accurate overall sense of what Robinson must have experienced in the years leading up to 1947, and then in 47. So I like it quite a bit. I've grown far less concerned about the faults that biopics have, unless they alter history and alter completely the way we thought about it. But if you get the essence, then it's okay with me, and it certainly did. Very quickly, I was in Venice, California. We went to the beach a couple of days ago when they opened it up with my daughter, just to walk along it. And as we were walking back to the car, because you can't park on the beach, so we had a few blocks walk to get back to the car, I passed a little building of about 5 or 6 apartments on Venice, close to the beach, and its address was 42, whatever street it was. Mm-hmm. And the 42 was in white, and the building had been painted Dodger blue, and the trim was white. And again, it's 42. And I thought, that somebody at some point did this on purpose. Like, this is this building here in Venice with 5 residents near the beach is this subtle homage to Jackie Robinson. It was too big a coincidence.
Mm. You know what surprised me about this movie was the depiction of Branch Rickey. I had my doubts about Harrison Ford. He's a great actor, no question. I just didn't see him as Rickey. I thought he was great. Yeah,
I thought he was too. One of the lines my father taught me at a young age that I still say, luck is the residue of design. It's made me forgive myself for some of the luck that I've had. And I definitely had some luck, including landing the TCM job. And then I think, all right, look, man, luck is the residue of design. I might not have known that I was designing it, but if you're prepared for something, if you've worked to prepare yourself, when luck presents itself, and you take advantage of it, it's not just luck. And I think that helps anybody, I think, go forward in life. It's a great line.
Ben, let's touch upon 2 more movies going back in time a little bit. Let's go back to the 70s. Bad News Bears with Walter Matthau and Tatum O'Neal. I have mixed feelings about it. It's very funny, but also very crude, not in good taste in some ways, even all these years later. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Where do you stand on the Bears?
I definitely ultimately come down and love it. But, however long it's been since you've seen it, if you watch it again, you have a lot of moments. Oh, man. There's a ton of inappropriate moments that I guess we ignored, or many people ignored, in 1976. I think it's important to see films in context. But there's some moments that are shocking and bracing. But overall, I still think it's incredibly funny, written, as you well know, by Burt Lancaster's son, Bill.
Mm.
And, Mathau's so great in everything. And to see Jodie Foster, anytime you see a child actor, really successfully turn into an adult actor, and you see her range. I mean, this is 1976. This is the, same year she's in Taxi Driver. I mean, she had range and depth as a kid, and she has range and depth now.
And yet Tatum O'Neal was the big star. I mean, she was a huge star.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. Sorry. I'm
Okay.
literally staring at Walter Matthau, Tatum O'Neal, and said Jodie Foster. Well, I'm doing this podcast, Peter Bogdanovich, so I saw Tatum O'Neal, and I was thinking, oh, Tatum O'Neal was in Paper Moon, right? And Jackie, and so it must have been. It's weird. I'm literally staring at it. Yeah. So forget what I said about. It's true about Jodie Foster. But not in this case. Yeah, Tatum, she's terrific, and already growing, because 3 years earlier, when Peter Bogdanovich does Paper Moon with Tatum, she, she was a challenge to draw that performance out. Obviously, 3 years younger, but Peter got it, and I don't know how difficult it was to get the performance out of her here, but she was obviously growing, and she turned into I know she's had her issues, but she turned into a high quality adult actor as well. Rescue Me. You see sort of the FX show with Dennis Leary. You see the range that Tatum O'Neal has as an adult.
We continue with Ben Mankiewicz, a terrific historian for Turner Classic Movies. We want to take some of your questions in the chat room. We have one from Mike Swartz. I think Ben might be able to answer this. I know I can't. On average, how long does it usually take to film a baseball-related movie? Any idea on that, Ben?
I mean, I don't think it's any longer or shorter than another movie. Probably long. It can't be on the short end, because you really can't shoot a legit baseball movie. Inside. You can't do it in a studio. You've got to have location shooting, and so getting the baseball stuff right. Which is critical. You got to have baseball fans for the success of a baseball movie. You want to expand it and make it a big enough story so that it appeals to non-fans, but you lose the fans instantly if you get stuff wrong. So you got to get it right. You got to use a bunch of cameras. You're going to have to get shots again and again, and you got to cast actors capable of doing it. When you don't, and as soon as they throw, right? You see somebody playing catch and you think, never picked up a baseball before this movie. And that happens a lot. So I would say on average, almost certainly longer, because you can't do it all in a studio, which enables you to go quicker. That obviously increases the speed. You can't do that with a baseball.
Question from Matthew Shadler. Ben, what is your feeling on The Sandlot?
So I can't figure out whether to be honest, but by saying this, I now committed to it. I've never seen The Sandlot start to finish. And my only fear in saying that to you is that, so I'm trying to get my daughter to watch it because I haven't seen it. And there's so many people who I care about in my life who treasure it. So I'm anticipating it mattering. I can't tell you why I didn't see it. It doesn't really make any sense. Maybe the fact that exactly sort of at the moment that it comes out, that's when the idea of a kid's movie doesn't appeal to me in a significant way, or a movie about children, not really a kid's movie, but a movie. Well, it is, but so I've, watched the trailer, and I've certainly seen some of it for research purposes. My only fear is that by admitting that I haven't seen it, that somebody's going to find some interview I did where I pretend to have seen it. But now I've set the record straight here, in May of 2020, that no, I have not seen it start to finish, but it's coming soon. It was on the list. It got beat out last week in our family movie night by 3 Men and a Baby.
Question from Max Thompson. Ben, what are some of the movies that you have worked on? You've been in a couple of films.
Oh yeah, not really. I mean, I just play a reporter. I've always played a reporter, or a TV anchor, something like that. The standard question for me is, Mr. Mayor, will you respond to the allegations? That's just have me say things like that. I've learned pretty quickly through the auditioning process to host shows, game shows, talk shows before I landed the TCM job. Auditioning is hard. My respect for actors is through the roof on that. risk yourself, put yourself out there in these awful auditions in these sterile rooms in front of a casting director, maybe one other person, no audience to laugh if you say anything funny. Sometimes they aren't paying attention. All those things, all the moments you see of auditions being awkward in movies is correct. So I had great fun on White House Down, which I think is the best Die Hard sequel, and with Jamie Foxx and Channing Tatum. I didn't work with any of those people, but the director, Roland Emmerich, had me. I'm in it to sort of explain stuff on TV so the characters in the movie can turn on the TV and see what's happening elsewhere. And I played an anchor. My hair's way too long, but they had a script, and then Roland Emmerich was like, "Hey, I get this. This is probably not what TV anchors would say. Just make these points and do whatever you want." So I liked that he sort of let me do that. That was fun. And the last episode, I didn't know was the last episode of not Party of Five, I can't even remember the name of the show that people loved. Fred Savage directed, about the caterers. I like doing that too. And it turned out to be the last episode of that show. It'd be helpful if I could remember the name.
We'll take a couple more questions for Ben Mankiewicz from Chris Burns. Any thoughts on It Happens Every Spring, where Ray Milland hits the bottle again, only this time it's hair tonic? I don't completely understand the question. Maybe Ben does.
Yeah, I mean, so that's not one of the great baseball movies, although I think Ray Milland is a undervalued actor. It's one of a number of movies like the original Angels in the Outfield with another wonderful actor, Paul Douglas, that just doesn't quite, to me, get the baseball stuff right, and so baseball fans are out. Fear Strikes Out, Anthony Perkins. This is not only is it not Jimmy Pearsall, it's not a guy who played a lot of baseball. Doesn't seem to me. And I think that's a huge flaw in movies where they think, well, we'll get the actor who will appeal to people, but we're not going to care too much about the baseball stuff. And there's some great moments in it, like the scene that you mentioned, but again, I don't think you're going to find it on any list, I don't think I'm mistaken, of any list of anybody's list of the top baseball movies ever made.
Well, at the very least, it is a better film than Milland's The Thing with Two Heads, in which he starred with Rosie Greer.
He did. I can't remember whether, Milland directed not many, like 5 or maybe 9, some small number of movies, and I'm trying to remember if that was one of them. I think not, because I think they were all pretty good. Rosie Greer was with my father the night that Bobby Kennedy was killed, because Greer was working for the senator too.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Final question coming from Charles Robertson. Ben, what about 8 Men Out? I think it's a great movie, tremendous cast, memorable subject matter. What do you say?
First of all, I just looked it up. Party Down. I was going to say Party Five.
Down.
Party Down is the show. Which is a great show. 8 Men Out. Again, I think it's good. It certainly works as the baseball in it works. Again, it's one of those movies that where maybe John Sayles, who wrote and directed it, doesn't necessarily get the accuracy of what happened. But I guess my understanding is, we don't really fully know what happened. We know they took the money, but we don't know whether, certainly it appears Joe Jackson didn't do anything to throw the series. We won't really know that. Writers can say how hard he went after balls in the outfield. There's no way to know whether he pulled up on anything, to be sure, unless we know that there was nothing that he didn't catch that could have been caught. And I guess I haven't read enough, but I remember the objections to it that way. I think, I don't ever want to be on Landis banned him, right? Is that right? I have the right commissioner.
That's correct.
So. Yeah. So I don't want to be on his side ever, and I certainly don't want to be on Comiskey's side. But you can't you can't ruin the competitive nature of the game by gambling. And I'm a gambler. I love gambling, but I mean, it is a reason. If you're going to ban somebody for life, that's a solid reason to. Although I guess there was not enough investigation into it. And it matters. That story matters so much to baseball people that it's one of those things like JFK, a movie I love, but I'm confused by the history. Like, wait a minute, were there stories about Oswald in Soviet papers before it had been announced in the US? Like, no, obviously, but it says that, and so people believe it, and it's about a big enough issue. And for baseball fans, the banning of those 8 players matters, not as much as maybe the history of who killed President Kennedy, but so that's when I start to object to biopics. But that said, as a movie, I think it's good. I think the performances are good. I still remember stuff from it. So that tells you that it's a well-made picture.
Last question for me, and this is my unofficial nomination for the worst baseball movie of all time, The Babe, 1992. And it's hard for me to say this because John Goodman's a great actor. He's had a terrific career. But there's something about Babe Ruth movies, whether it's Goodman or Bendix, whomever, it just doesn't work.
It's hard to portray somebody that big in life. One of the great things about TCM is that it's afforded me some real meaningful friendships with some older actors, with some actors from a different generation. One of them, Norman Lloyd, who's 105 years old now. And Norman is great. And he's the guy in Saboteur who falls off the Statue of Liberty. It was his first feature, the Hitchcock film. Norman's a huge baseball fan. And, he's one of the few people, obviously, you'll ever meet. He'll tell you, Ben, when I went to game, whatever it was, 4 of the 1926 World Series, and he'll tell you who pitched. And he'll have exactly, he said, I believe he went 8 innings, and it turns out he's correct. And he was there for Ruth stealing a base, sliding into second base, and ripping his pants and calling out the trainer to stitch his pants up as he stood with his hands on his hips, sort of, milking the crowd at second base. And Ruth was a showman. I said earlier that I think he could have been an actor. He was a performer. And so that's why people believe the pointing story, because it's the kind of thing he would have done, even though he may well not have done it. So I think capturing that aura is a challenge, but it requires a good script. And John Goodman is a A-list actor, a tremendous performer. And I don't know whether this is in the movie, but my dad saw it and hated it and thought and so he used to say it's the kind of movie where someone in the crowd will say on a cutaway, and maybe it's even in there, but I feel like my dad made it up, that someone in a crowd scene will go, oh no, not another foul. Like it doesn't get it. They don't get it, and they didn't get it in The Babe.
Yeah. Well, Ben, we really want to thank you for joining us. It's been a delight for me. I hope it's been a delight for the fans. I imagine that it has been. I've long been a fan of Turner Classic. We have several of our staff members. I mentioned Tom Schieber, Bill Francis. They watch you and the channel faithfully. My sister, Adrienne, is a huge fan. She once met Robert Osborne in New York City, talked about what a great gentleman he was.
He was.
And when Robert Osborne passed away, I guess we're all worried, like, oh, what are they going to do? And you have just carried it on so beautifully in a different way, but in an effective way. And you, along with Robert, have done such a great job in bringing these films to life, putting them in context, both today and in the past. So it's just a great job that you've done over the years, and I hope you will continue to do for many, many years. We hope you can come to Cooperstown. If you do, let us know. We'll take you around the Hall of Fame.
That'd be great, and thanks for mentioning me in the same breath as Robert. He left the TCM in a better place than he found it, so he set everybody up for success. So I owe him a deep debt of gratitude.
Ben Mankiewicz, you can see him regularly introducing Turner Classic Films and also coming in after the film to offer his perspectives. Films from so many different eras, the silent era, the 20s, all the way up to the current day. So again, we thank Ben for joining us. We also thank everybody listening and watching today. And just one quick reminder, another great guest coming up 2 weeks from today. We'll be off next week, but 2 weeks from today, it's June 12th. And our guest is going to be Hall of Famer Jim Thome. So we follow up Ben Mankiewicz with Jim Thome, 2 pretty heavy hitters. Thanks again, Ben.
He hit behind me in college, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, absolutely. You were the leadoff man and set the table. Thank you, Ben. Great job. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody, for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the program. Have a great weekend, everybody.